Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a special edition of The Update. Today we are going to provide everything you need to know before the November 5th election.
Including all the steps leading up to the election, what's on the ballot, who's running, and how to vote.
Along with the races across the country to watch, what happens after the election, a last check of polls and facts, along with something for you to consider.
6 days separate us and the election, so thank you for tuning in to The Update, where you'll find all your news and politics. I'm Jordan Tovar.
And I'm Johnny Valtman. And Jordan, it has been just a long journey. I mean, we came into here last year, preparing for the caucus ended, and now preparing for the presidential election, and now it's only a week away.
I mean, yeah, Johnny, I always feel like there's so much information flying at me at once. I find it kind of hard to process sometimes. So, Johnny, what's been going on in the steps leading up to this?
Oh, yes, Jordan, and it is a lot that happened. So let me tell you, before we get anywhere near close to where we are today, we have to take a look back at the roller coaster of drama, dropouts, twists, turns, and more from this election cycle. And I would pinpoint the beginning of this election cycle to the last election back in 2020 when Joe Biden beat Donald Trump for the presidency. This would eventually boil over and lead to an alleged insurrection at the Capitol on January 6, 2021, where pro-Trump supporters stormed the Capitol in an attempt to overturn the election. The alleged insurrection failed, and Joe Biden would be inaugurated as president on January 20th. So much has happened between there, here, and everywhere. COVID-19 was still going on, leading to some of the high inflation we saw along with other factors. Roe v. Wade was overturned. The war between Ukraine and Russia began, along with the Israel-Hamas war. Donald Trump was hit with 4 cases with dozens of charges from interfering with the 2020 election, classified documents, and hush money cases. When it was time for the candidates to throw their hats in the ring to try and be the next president, 13 Republicans vied for the Republican nomination. But the Iowa caucus showed that Republicans still wanted Trump as he won in a historic landslide. Not even a month later, all the Republican candidates had dropped out. Joe Biden faced little competition on the other side as he secured the Democrats' nomination for re-election. But as Biden's gaffes flared up and a rough debate performance over the summer, polling showed Trump distancing himself from Biden. Slowly, Democrats began calling for Biden to drop out of the race, which he did. That opened the door for Kamala Harris, his vice president, to take over the reins as the Democrat nominee for president. And if you thought that was crazy, there was so much more that happened. Over the summer, Trump was almost assassinated, but he lived, and that led to Trump and Harris both becoming the party's nominee officially at their respective conventions. Ohio Senator J.D. Vance and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz were then selected as the two's respective running mates. And then in a shocker, independent Robert F. Kennedy Jr. dropped out of the race to endorse Trump. Only 2 debates were held, as Trump and Harris's debate was remembered for wild claims and its entertainment value. But on the flip side of that coin, the vice presidential debate was a return to normalcy, with candidates talking about policies and visions. Now, after months of drama, switch-ups, campaigns, interviews, and so much more, we are 6 days away from the election of our lifetimes, at least until 2028. And Jordan, I think I got to catch my breath after all that. Just so much happened. I mean, I worked at KCCI over the summer. You worked at KCRG. And it just seemed like every time I went into work, something was going on.
Well, Johnny, I was actually lucky enough to not be working on the 2 days that stuff happened. I was up in northern Iowa when Trump got shot. And then, I was just off work when I was sitting at a restaurant and I saw Biden announced he's dropping out. You could have said it was really Jover then.
It was just a wild election cycle. But, everything's kind of sued down a little bit. I mean, it's a mad dash to election, but hopefully, fingers crossed, nothing crazy happens between now and the election. And Jordan, something I've been thinking about, I was trying to look at it earlier. I was trying to figure out what was on the ballot before I go and vote.
Well, yeah, Johnny, and as with every election, there are lots of different candidates and races to look at for your ballot on November 5th. Of course, the races between Democrat Kamala Harris and Republican Donald Trump for the presidency is the biggest draw in this year's election, as it always is in years like this. But those aren't the only 2 on the ballot next Tuesday in Johnson County, however. Those include County Board of Supervisors, Auditor, and Sheriff. Statewide races include those for Iowa's U.S. District 1 representative and the one-horse race for Iowa's District 90. Also among the races include Iowa Supreme Court, District Court, and Court of Appeals judges. While there are lots of candidates to choose from, they aren't the only things being voted on in this election. On Johnson's ballot, there are 3 public measures to look at for this year. The first 2 are changes to Iowa's constitution. Public Measure 1 includes codifying that 17-year-olds can vote in primary elections if they will be 18 by Election Day. Now, if this sounds familiar, that's because it's already state law to do this. It would just add it to the Constitution. Now, the measure also includes a language change from every citizen of the United States can vote to only a citizen of the United States can vote in the Iowa Constitution. Public Measure 2 deals with the line of succession in Iowa if the governor were to become unable to do their job. It basically says that the lieutenant governor would take over as governor and appoint a lieutenant governor in the event that that happens. The change would take place until the end of the governor that was initially elected's term. And for the third and final measure, we've got a Johnson County specific one. It would be a bond of no more than $30 million to help the Johnson County Conservation Board work on things like connecting trails to each other and supporting greenbelts, which are open spaces around urban areas like parks and farms. Now, around the country, there's lots of hot-button issues going on these ballots. So nationally, the top 3 public measures on ballots include 39 states dealing with elections, government, and judicial systems, 31 states including financial and fiscal policy on theirs, and the next highest includes 14 states dealing with criminal law. Now, I've given you a lot of names for seats that are up for grabs this year, but not really a whole lot of names of who's actually running for these seats and positions. For that, I'll send it out to Jayce Bertrand in the newsroom with who specifically is on the ballot in 2024.
Thanks, guys, and there are several names to know going into next week, so let's get right into it. First and foremost, former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris are facing off on the national stage in their bids for presidency. Their campaigns have dominated the headlines for most of the year, with issues like abortion, the economy, immigration, and conflicts overseas taking place in the minds of voters. 4 Iowa House of Representative spots are also up for grabs this year. In District 1, which includes Johnson County, the race is between incumbent Marionette Miller Meeks and challenger Christina Bohannon. District 2 is between incumbent Ashley Hinson and Democrat Sarah Corkery, while independent Jody Puffett is also declared to run. District 3 is between incumbent Zach Nunn and Democrat Landon Backham, while District 4 is between incumbent Randy Feenstra and Ryan Melton. All 4 House spots are being controlled by Republicans at the time, but with 2 races being considered toss-ups, the makeup of Iowa's congressional seats could change. Meanwhile, back here in Iowa City, some seats are also up for grabs. Some seats, such as the Sheriff's Office in Iowa District 90, are being sought unopposed by Brad Kunkel and Adam Zabner, respectively, while multiple other Iowa congressional districts are locked in races of their own, as well as for the Johnson County Board of Supervisors. And elsewhere in the country, several key positions are up for grabs in key swing states. Out in my home state, Nevada, Democrat Jackie Rosen is seeking a second term for Senate against Republican Sam Brown. As for House seats, Democrats Susie Lee and Stephen Horsford are seeking re-election against Republicans Drew Johnson and John Lee, respectively. There are numerous other races around the country to watch as well. Texas Senator Ted Cruz is fighting to keep his seat against Democrat Colin Allred after just barely beating Beto O'Rourke in 2018. Independent candidate Dan Osborne is threatening Republican Deb Fischer's position as Nebraska senator, while Republican Larry Hogan is looking to become the first red senator in deep blue Maryland since 1980, running against Angela Alsobrooks. And there are dozens, if not hundreds, of other races to look out for, but we'll get into that later. So for now, back to Johnny and Jordan in the studio.
Thanks, Jayce. And Jordan, just through 3 segments, a lot of information getting thrown our way. Who's running, what's up for grabs, all that fun jazz. But the biggest thing I think it comes down to in an election is how people vote.
Yeah, John, and I'm lucky enough to have voted already at the Iowa Memorial Union, and this is my second general election voting, so this isn't my first rodeo, but for a lot of people around the country, it is their first rodeo this year, and some of that process is kind of confusing. So we're going to send it to Hannah Lipski, who has how to vote.
Thanks, gentlemen. Now, the first step in voting is to register. Luckily in Iowa, you can register on Election Day at the polling place assigned to your address. But you can also register online, at the auditor's office, or at booths with volunteers set up until Election Day. Now, early voting is in full swing, and there are a record number of people voting in this election in several states. There are 3 ways to vote: mail-in ballot, absentee early voting, and on Election Day. In Iowa, early voting began 20 days before the election, and there is a full early voting calendar for Johnson County leading up to the election. You can vote every day at the Johnson County Auditor's Office leading up to Election Day, 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. through Wednesday, and then until 5 p.m. on Thursday and Friday. Saturday, 9 a.m. to 5, and 12 to 5 on Sunday. Next Monday, again, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. for the last day of early voting. You can also vote at the Iowa City Public Library today from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. and at the North Liberty Library Friday and Saturday from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. If you wanted a mail-in ballot for Iowa or for another state you reside in, you unfortunately would have had to needed to already request it. And on Election Day, you can vote at your designated polling place stated in your voter's registration. There are a few things you need to bring with you to vote in person either early or on Election Day. Your voter's registration, proof of identity, and proof of residency. The list on your screen are documents that qualify for proof of identity and residency. Make your plan to vote and give yourself ample time. It's your civil duty as an American to cast your vote. Now I'll toss it over to Kayla for races to watch.
Thanks, Hannah. There is a lot at stake this election for Democrats and Republicans who want to keep a hold of their majority in Congress. The Senate is in the hands of the Democrats, who hold a majority of 47 to 49, and the other 4 seats belong to independents, 3 of which who chose to caucus with the Democrats. On the other hand, the House of Representatives is controlled by Republicans with a margin of 220 to 212, with 2 seats vacant. With small margins between who controls what, there are a lot of races to keep an eye out for. Starting in Iowa, we have 2 important races for a seat in the House. Republican incumbent Marionette Miller Meeks is against Democrat Christina Bohannon in the 1st District, and Republican Zach Nunn is defending his seat against Democrat Landon Bacom in District 3. Miller Meeks beat Bohannon in 2022 by nearly 7% of the vote. Now, this seat is crucial for Democrats, as the 1st District is the best chance they have of earning a seat in the House in Iowa. District 3 is their second option and has been expected to be a heavily contested district. Nunn previously won the district by 0.6% in 2022. If Democrats can flip both seats, they're halfway to flipping the House, but Republicans are hoping to keep all 4 seats red. When it comes to the Senate, Nebraska is a state to look out for, as an underdog is fighting for a Senate seat. There are currently 4 independents in the Senate, and Dan Osborne is hoping to gain another by challenging Republican incumbent Deb Fischer. In Nebraska, there are no Democrats running for Senate, and every congressional seat is held by a Republican. Currently, Osborne and Fischer are in a tight race, with Fischer around 2% ahead in the polls. If Osborne wins, it would take Nebraska out of its Republican stronghold and disrupt Republican plans to regain majority in the Senate. In Pennsylvania, we're seeing a toss-up between Democratic incumbent Bob Casey and Republican David McCormick. Now, Pennsylvania is crucial for the presidency, and its Senate seat is just as important. We're seeing how important that seat is, as Pennsylvania's race for the Senate has drawn more money than any other race, with the exception of the presidential election and Ohio Senate election. Now, Casey is the longest-serving Democratic senator in Pennsylvania history and had been leading McCormick in the polls. But now, with just 6 days until the election, his lead is dropping. And if Casey loses, it could tip the Senate back to the Republicans. Now, there are a lot of other races to look out for across the country, but for now, I'll send it back to Jordan and Johnny.
Thanks, Kayla. And Jordan, as she was outlining, there is a lot at stake, not only just the presidency, but Senate races and House of Representatives. And as people may not know that, whoever controls the Senate, whoever controls the House of Representatives has a huge impact on, legislation throughout our country.
Yeah, Johnny, an absolutely massive impact. But, a lot of people don't know is what happens after the election? Where do we go from here? So we're going to send it back to Hannah Lipski, who has what's going to happen after the election.
Thank you, guys. Now, the question looming over America, what happens after the election is called? A recent poll from thehill.com says over 6 in 10 Americans are preparing for violence after the election. Now, the election results probably won't be called for a couple of days after November 5th. Swing states Nevada and Georgia are actually counting ballots by hand. And the election won't be certified for quite some time either. Each state has their own deadline for certifying their state's election results around late November, early December. This is the rough timeline of how the president takes power after the election. December 11th is the safe harbor deadline. Congress cannot challenge any electors on or after this date. December 17th, each elector must cast their vote for president, and each state governor must certify their state's presidential election results. The results will arrive on December 25th, and on January 3rd, the new Congress will be sworn in. On January 6th, Congress counts electoral votes, and the winner is formally certified. Now, in the case that the Electoral College is deadlocked, they will refer to the 12th Amendment. The House will vote for president, each state only getting 1 vote, and the Senate votes for vice president. And on noon of January 20th, the new president's term begins. Inauguration Day is a firm date in the U.S. Constitution. Now I'll send it back over to Jordan and Johnny.
Thanks, Hannah. And Jordan, now that we've been over a lot of, the pre-election stuff, we're going to be dipping our toes back into some of the update originals. And one of those things is poll watch and polls. With the election being a week away, this is going to almost be kind of our final look before people actually go to the polls and solidify our president.
Well, Johnny, I'm just going to say this. You better not just keep your toes in the tub. You better get ready to put your whole foot in there, as we're going to keep things in state and look at Iowa's 4 National House of Representatives seats to see where they stand ahead of next week's election. First, we'll start off in our home District 1, which features Republican incumbent Marionette Miller Meeks and Democratic challenger Christina Bohannon. Now, these next few polls I'm using from the Des Moines Register do not name specific candidates, but rather uses party names in their place. In District 1, people prefer a Democratic candidate to a Republican by a margin of 49 to 46%, with 5% who weren't exactly sure yet. And mind you, this is the only district in the state that shows a Democratic winner. Now, swinging it up to District 2, we're seeing a little bit of a larger gap this time, favoring the Republicans, who currently hold a 8% margin lead over their Democratic counterparts. If the Register had named candidates, they would be incumbent Ashley Hinson for the right and Sarah Corkery for the left. For District 3, we see the exact same numbers as District 2. The candidates here would be Republican Zach Nunn, the incumbent, and Landon Bacam as the Democratic challenger. In the largest disparity between parties, we head west to District 4, which sees the Republicans blowing out the Democrats by a margin of 57% to 38, a near 20% gap. Now I'm going to stretch myself out a little bit here and spread across the country to the presidential election between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. Largely, the race has been closed for the most part, with polls not really seeing much budging between numbers. And as I promised you lovely folks at home last week, we're going to round out our final 2 swing states, starting off with the Quaker state of Pennsylvania. Out east, the Keystone State is staying tight, with Trump claiming a minute lead, polling in at 47.9% and Harris at 47.6%. Wrapping up the swing states for this election, we're taking a trip down south to the great Tar Heel state of North Carolina. There's a bigger gap here, but only ever so slightly. Donald Trump holds a 1.3% lead over Harris with 48.4% compared to Kamala Harris's 47.1% total. Now, these states that I've been talking about are crucial to any campaign, but you gotta win the votes of more than just those if you want to win the election. So we're gonna take a look at what the United States at large thinks of the 2 candidates. Across the country, things are following the trend of being a tight race. So tight, in fact, that Harris and Trump are breathing down each other's necks with a dead even gap of 48 to 48% as we head into less than a week before the November 5th election. And as they always say, numbers never lie. And you know what else doesn't lie, Johnny?
What doesn't lie, Jordan?
The facts.
You're absolutely right. The cold, hard facts. And in an age of misinformation, we always need fact checkers, always double checking work, always making sure that what's going on is right and true. But sometimes we don't see that, but luckily for us, we have Jayce Bertrand, who is in the newsroom, who's going to tell us all the facts we need to know leading up to the election.
Thanks, guys. And like I said last week, when it comes to election season, there's a whole bunch of misinformation and lies coming out, especially how an election works. First off, it is highly unlikely we are going to have a set winner by the end of the night on November 5th. With key swing states like Nevada and Georgia implementing hand-counted ballots, there may be a few days, maybe even a week until we have an official winner. This is nothing new. We didn't have a clear winner back in the day before electronic ballots, and we didn't have a clear winner in 2000, and we didn't have a clear winner in 2020. This only became an issue 4 years ago when the Trump campaign started launching lawsuits. Second, there are going to be errors made with voting machines, just like there are going to be errors made with hand counting ballots. This happens with every election. The odds of enough errors being made to fully swing an election in the opposite direction are next to 0. And finally, I want to take some time to explain the Electoral College and how it works to elect a president. Following the Constitution, each state is given a certain amount of electors based on their total population. These electors are awarded to whichever candidate has the most votes in the state. This is a winner-takes-all system, so even if a candidate wins by 1 vote, they will receive the entirety of that state's electors. The only 2 states where this isn't the case is in Nebraska and Maine, where one of the electors is given a special district in each state. Following November 5th, the electors send their votes to Washington, where Congress gathers to certify these votes. In literally every case besides 2020, this is an honorary ceremony and has very little legal standing or precedence. And of course, as much as I like to sit here and talk about misinformation and checking the facts, I know we're going to have more and more coming out as the election carries on. So I'm going to sit here and keep looking at misinformation. But for now, back to Johnny and Jordan in the studio.
Now, Johnny, you can't argue with the cold, hard facts. And, I remember one episode I called us the triumvirate of cold and hard. But I think you've got something a little more opinion-based to talk to us about, Johnny.
Yes, Jordan. And with the election coming up, it is a big time. The future of our country is going to change no matter who gets elected. It is a monumental time in history that generations will look back on this election and see the ripple effects throughout history. And so, ladies and gentlemen, in 6 days, our country will be changing forever. But sure, this happens every 4 or 8 years, or if you're old enough, even 12. But an election marks the renewal of a party or candidate remaining in charge or the changing of the guard. But something I think we all need to agree on is that whoever wins, wins. Plain and simple. And instead of tearing the other party down, why don't we come together for once? Since the 2000 nail-biter and controversy of an election between George Bush and Al Gore, it seems every 4 years in the 21st century that faith in the election process has simmered. Whether it's the voting count, media bias, and whatever else people can dig up, led to a boil up 4 years ago when Donald Trump refused to accept he lost a fair and free election in 2020 against Joe Biden, chasing after false claims and fighting tooth and nail to retain his spot. As mentioned, the alleged insurrection at the Capitol on January 6, 2021 was 20 years of not only skepticism surrounding election results, but the polarizing trends of political parties. Both parties have continued to drift and villainize the other. The scale of political rhetoric, personal attacks, and spread of false information pushed by both sides has not only divided the people who run the country, but the people who send these politicians to represent their voices. But my biggest pleas I can ask of anyone is to vote and to be civil. Your vote does matter. Whether it's for the president, House of Representatives, state or local government, or any measure you will vote on November 5th, it is important and it does count. Just as importantly, civility needs to be restored in politics. Both sides are guilty of taking their side and not trying to attempt to see the other. As someone who loves playing devil's advocate, seeing both sides of a story bronze critical thinking that our country lacks. At the rate we are running, our country may never be able to sit down at the same table again to see eye to eye on anything. I'm not saying you have to agree with everything. What I'm saying is that opinions should be valued and respected. And Jordan, that's just kind of my 2 cents of what I have to say going into the election. And now I wonder if you have any words of wisdom you'd like to spread onto the viewers.
Well, yeah, Johnny, I completely agree with you. All this Democrat and Republican stuff. I see people losing friends, losing family members, and most importantly, losing sight of themselves. So, I think you should just stay civil no matter who wins.
Well spoken, Jordan. And with that, we'd like to thank you for tuning into the update tonight, where you'll find all your news and politics.
Don't forget that the DITV will be going live election night at 8 p.m. Central Time with reporters from Nevada, Wisconsin, and even Georgia, along with local election coverage.
Yeah, Jordan, you'll be in Georgia. Jayce, you saw him earlier, he'll be out in Nevada. We have a couple of other update people who will be around the state and here anchoring. And of course, I'm going to be in that producer's booth all night, Jordan. Cannot wait. And we will have it all. So that's why we will not be back next week. But tune in back in 2 weeks for a full recap on what lies ahead. From the update, I'm Johnny Valtman.
And I'm Jordan Tovar. Have a wonderful night, and don't forget to get out there and vote.